Welcome to the program. Great friends of the program. Emily Seidel, Brent Gardner, AFP. We are here tonight for a lovely event. I gotta say, crazy you invited us. We are campaign guys at heart. Guys who've been out in the field for our entire career. People who are usually behind a computer like me, the digital guy. Right. You're lucky I'm wearing pants tonight. And I'm all fancy up here in this tuxedo. And when I think of AFP, I think of phone banks. I think of wearing jeans and knocking doors. So what is it that we're celebrating here tonight?
Well, we're tricking everybody. We're actually going door knocking right after this. Good thing you have comfortable shoes on.
Yeah, right.
No, we're celebrating 20 years of Americans for Prosperity. We've been celebrating all year. We had a big celebration out in Pittsburgh with our entire staff a couple of months ago, and then we went door knocking for McCormick out there. But here tonight, we're celebrating 20 years of working with tremendous partners in Washington, D.C. to get good policy passed and stop really bad ideas in our nation's capital.
Yeah, well, 20 years is a very long time. I'm wondering if you can tell people how you got here.
Well, it's a long journey. I'm too old. Too young, rather, to have known at the beginning. I'm just kidding. No, we started as a startup, right? And you know how many startups actually fail? What percentage?
Most of them.
A lot.
89%.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so it took a lot of bootstraps, sort of grit and scrappiness at the beginning to even prove that we could organize people and have an impact on public policy at the local level. And then, from there, if you look back 20 years ago, just think about where the country was 20 years ago. First of all, Tiger Woods, I think, had just won his first PGA tournament. Mm-hmm. Shrek 2 was the box office blockbuster. Mm-hmm. I don't know if your kids watch that.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Howard Dean was doing it.
Howard Dean was doing a scream.
Yeah.
It was a long time ago, and if you look at what was happening in politics, the left was way better at the right at organizing people, driving public policy, turning people out to vote. And if you were a limited government, sort of freedom-oriented person, you kind of felt alone, you felt outgunned. And our benefactors at the beginning, they looked around at that environment and they said, we should do something. And then they looked at Washington, D.C. and they said, well, there's a lot of good people working in think tanks, but it seems like we need a do tank. And that was the beginning of AFP.
Yeah, politics goes to those who show up.
That's
is
amen.
The famous saying,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Well, not only do you still exist now 20 years later, but you've grown a ton and you've succeeded a ton. Tell us about that.
Well, you want to talk about some of our best policy wins?
Yeah, listen, so much of our success has not just only occurred here in D.C., but really across the country and state capitals. I think just the last couple of years, seeing the expanse of education freedom has been really impressive. There have been wins on labor fights over the years. We've seen all kinds of opportunities at the federal level, like the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which obviously we're going to revisit when we get to next year. But I think across this country, so many of the great victories and so much of the great momentum that we've seen around issues that have really taken regions or taken a lot of different states by storm have been at the behest of a lot of the AFP activists and folks that have worked hard on those issues.
Yeah, in education, labor, low taxes.
Correct.
I'm sure we're going to hear about those tonight.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about what we're going to hear tonight on those topics.
Yeah, look, we're excited. I think this is a great opportunity to mark what 20 years has meant, which has been saving taxpayers hundreds of billions of dollars, focused on spending fights, ensuring that the growth of government is restricted. I think if we look at tax fights, those are the kind of things that are fought in state capitals and here in Washington, D.C. almost every year. And it's, you talked about politics being about showing up. It's also about getting up early and staying up later. And I think those are the things that make a difference, whether you're talking about a startup like AFP or a startup in a business. It's about really dedicated folks. So, we've taken the model that allowed us to be successful in so many of those tax fights and those spending fights and those education fights. And we've improved on that model. And I think that's why so many folks look at AFP as the right platform to go out there and engage on these issues. And we know that just in front of us, we've got a whole bunch more of those fights.
Yeah. Tonight we're going to celebrate 300 total policy wins in the last year, which is huge across the country. You mentioned education. 61 of those were education-specific policies policy fights. Parents out there are fired up about helping their kids have an individualized education, something that helps them discover and develop their own unique gifts. Every child is different. 61 of those wins across 25 states is transforming the future for the next generation.
And God bless you for doing it. It's incredible, incredible work. Been in DC for a while now, and what I've seen is organizations come and go, rise and fall with administrations or with movements, and AFP has had that staying power here over this last 20 years. I'm wondering, like, what have you learned in the last 20 years?
Learned a lot of things. The biggest one, quite frankly, is that you need to know what you stand for. You're going to hear a lot about that tonight. You need to understand why you do what you do, the principles that guide you.
There's a lot of weather vanes out there.
That's right. That's right. And so you got to point towards that North Star at all times, no matter what. And sometimes that's really hard, especially in Washington, D.C. But that's the biggest thing. If you stand for your principles, no matter what, it sets you apart from what other people might be doing out there. And that attracts people who are attracted to those principles, who want to stand for them. One of the other things that we've learned, and why a big reason why we're having this celebration tonight, is that we need tremendous partners to fight for freedom. You can't do it on your own. But I think one of the things that we want to make sure shines through in the conversations that we have with our partners here in Washington, D.C. is that what powers our movement, the people who are behind every win, every major campaign across the country, are just the voices of the American people. I mean, everyday grassroots activists, that's who we are. That's what powers what we do. And we've learned that that makes us unique in the marketplace. There's nobody else that can knock on the quantity of doors, host the kinds of events that we do across the country, the grassroots rallies, make the phone calls into races and into members' offices that we hear a lot of complaining about sometimes. And that's really what drives our success.
Yeah, you mentioned knocking on doors. There's obviously a very big election that's about a month away. And I wonder if you could tell people what you guys are doing. I know you're spread out all over the country trying to make sure that the right people are in office next year.
Yeah. So between AFP and AFP Action, we're engaged in over 600 races, which is our high water mark. We've never done that much. We've knocked 17 million doors so far, 14 million phone calls. We got started very early. We also did a ton of candidate recruitment, and so we recruited 135 candidates in about 27 states, I think. And all of that is so important because, you know, if you want to get better policies passed to help people live the American dream, you need to have the right people win elections, and that oftentimes means you need the right candidates running for office in the first place. And so we're kind of moving backwards in the timeline of politics to get involved earlier and earlier every single cycle to try to help people who want to be elected to advance these principles be successful at doing so. But you're right, it is this election is coming up pretty fast.
Yeah, but getting people elected is only part of that equation, right? You get them elected, great. Then you got to hold them accountable, and that's what AFP does best. It's public choice economics. You know, politicians respond to incentives just like everybody does in a marketplace, right? So 2025, what does that look like? What are the challenges, opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, look, we want good politics, good policy to be good politics, and I think to do that, we've started engaging folks at the local level very early on. We've talked about the issues that are going to matter. You know, we talked earlier about the fiscal cliff that's going to be a big issue next year. Government overreach is something that still remains strongly in people's minds coming out of the pandemic. So looking at ways where the administrative state continues to grow and restrict the ability for families and for individuals to start businesses and to be able to grow their careers. I think those are a big part of it. But look, what does accountability look like? The great thing about AFP is that persistence also makes a difference. You know, it's showing up. It's also not going away. I think when you have a set of
squeaky wheel gets the grease.
It sure does.
You know, I mean, this is politics.
And so, you know, the same kind of folks who are working so hard in elections, they don't go away once the elections are over. 365 days a year, they're engaged in the process. They're building relationships. They're making phone calls. Those phone calls, you know, in those instances are going to be to push for the kinds of policies that allow this country to be able to get back on track. And so, you know, we're going to be active in all the types of grassroots that have led to the policy successes we've been talking so far today. And so it'll be phone calls, it'll be knocking on doors, but we'll be doing it to try and get the kind of policies that are going to allow the American people, I think, to enjoy the promise of prosperity that's owed to them.
Okay, so that's 2025.
Yeah.
You guys have been around for 20 years. I'm wondering if you could just big picture with us, tell us what do you envision for the next 20 years?
Well, top line, we want good policy to win with the American people, win at the ballot box, and win in the halls of Congress. And to do that, we need to show up in a number of different ways. We recently opened about a year ago actually, opened a permanent office on Capitol Hill called the Freedom Embassy. It's a place for people to collaborate across this movement to figure out the right strategies and put together the right campaigns to get all of this done. And that's going to be the home for these ideas for the next 20 years. It's a big part of what we're doing.
It's a great spot, stocked with a lot of very friendly people.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, for us to have that local proximity close to the Capitol, where members of Congress, we're going to have about a little over 24 of them here tonight, can go and work closely with our policy partners, with policy experts, some of the smartest folks across the country on solving some of the challenges that we'll see in the next 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, if you're listening to this or you're watching this, you know what Election Day is, right? Like, you got that date circled in your calendar. But people like AFP make sure every other date also matters for these legislators and for their members. Nobody in the game does it better than y'all. If people want to get involved, what do they do?
Go to AmericansForProsperity.org.
Okay.
We've got state chapters across the country. You can get involved at the state level. And then, of course, we've got all of our federal campaigns as well, and you can have your voice heard by your senator and your congressman.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here, and thanks for having us tonight.
Thanks for being here.
Come on, guys.
Don't get too rowdy.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Actually, I want you to get rowdy.
I will. We
Okay.
can do that.
Great interview, fellas. I hope you had the time of your lives.
We had a good time.
Yeah, and I mean, there were a lot of people there. A lot of, like, Speaker Johnson was there.
Yep.
And there were a ton of lawmakers other than him. I think Senator Barrasso was there. It's a big deal.
Yeah,
20 years they've been around.
20 years, and they also invited, like, part of the program is they invited, like, all of their top activists from across the country.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
a lot of these battleground states.
Rewarding them on the big stage.
Right.
Yeah.
And being like, you're not just out there, making the phone calls and knocking the doors and nobody notices. Like,
That's awesome.
so that it was nice.
Well,